Hello class, Mr. Fino here. This is Unit 7, Lesson 4 on the Golden Age of Athens. So in this lesson, you will learn about the major cultural achievements of Athens. So I want to start with just painting a bit of a picture of what life would have looked like visually living in Athens. So suppose you could visit Athens during its golden age. And a golden age is a period of great peace and wealth. But suppose you could visit Athens at the time. Passing through the city's gates, you would wind your way through narrow streets to the Agora, which is the public meeting place in the center of the city. And here we have the Agora in this picture. The Agora is a large square with magnificent public buildings on two of its sides. You can see the temple here in this image. The other two sides have covered walkways where you would meet and talk with friends about current issues. You can see that right over here in the shops, some covered areas on this side as well. In the center of the square are market stalls with a variety of goods for sale from all over Greece and beyond. So you can see the stalls in the center where people are selling stuff. Nearby, you would see the Acropolis, a high, craggy hill crowned with great temples rising above the city. So there it is up there. See the Parthenon up on the Acropolis. So that's kind of painting our picture here of what life would have looked like in Athens. All right, so let's start with the question, what happened to Athens during the Greco-Persian Wars? So what happened was the Persians burned the city-state of Athens to the ground. So here's a couple of renderings of what that potentially would have looked like, but it was destroyed. It was gone. Athens was largely destroyed. So that leads us to, who was Pericles? So Pericles, who we see here, led the Athenian government from 460 to 429 BCE. And he redirected the building of the city of Athens and led the construction of public and religious buildings. He encouraged creativity in the arts, including music and drama. And Pericles worked to reform and improve democracy, believing all citizens had an equal right to participate in government. So one thing that he did was he had Athens pay the salary of government officials, which was important because it allowed poor men that were typically farmers and couldn't afford to be working in government to serve in these positions. All right, next we have the question, how did people live in Athens? So it was a city of contrasts. So most Athenians, the majority, lived in small, uncomfortable mud brick homes, maybe something that looked like this. But then you have the rich, wealthy Athenians who lived in larger homes that had rooms that surrounded a larger inner courtyard that might have looked something more like this. What did public spaces look like in Athens? So there were large stone government buildings surrounding the Agora, and they also built magnificent temples to the gods in the Acropolis. So you can see here a diagram of Athens in the 5th century BCE. So you can see on the top, here's the Acropolis up here. That's where they would have built, they said here, temples to their gods. And the Agora down here, you can see the large public buildings kind of surrounding it. So for Greek religion, each city-state had a god or goddess that provided special protection. So for example, Athens was named for the goddess Athena, right? The goddess of wisdom and war. So I'm looking at this, this piece of art showing Athena. I see she has the spear, she has the shield, and then the I'm guessing the owl represents wisdom. So that kind of, it all fits together. But each god or goddess controlled a certain aspect of life. The city-state of Delphi had another famous temple built to honor the god Apollo. And people went to this temple. So here's that temple. People went to this temple to seek advice from the oracle of Delphi, who went into a trance when delivering the words of Apollo. So she would go into a trance, and people thought that the words coming out of her mouth were coming straight from Apollo. And also, the Greeks told myths about the gods, right? Stories. Next, we have Greek architecture. So temples were built as homes to the gods and goddesses. Um, but religious ceremonies were conducted outside, as you see here. Balance was important when building temples, and the Greeks utilized long rows of columns, like you see here in the Parthenon. The three types of columns are shown here. So you've got Doric columns on the left. You've got Ionic columns in the center, and they have the scroll tops. You can see the scrolls on top. And then we've got Corinthian columns here, which was the most complex, with carvings that looked like leaves on the top. And the Athenians built 3 temples on the Acropolis to honor Athena. A little bit more about Greek architecture. So the most famous piece of Greek architecture was the Parthenon, or is the Parthenon, it still stands, with 8 columns across one side. So if you're counting this up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 columns across one side, and 17 columns across the other. So if I was to count across here, it'd be 17 this way. The roof was slanted, creating 2 triangular areas called pediments. So if you're looking up here, you can see that is a pediment there. And above the columns was a band of sculptures called frieze and metopes. Right, so up here above the columns, there's artwork. And most Athenian temples had a huge room with a large statue of its god in the middle. So if you look here, like this probably would be the statue right here in the center of the temple. All right, on the Greek sculpture. So this is kind of talking about the process for making statues. After making life-size clay models, the outline of the statue is roughed out in marble. So a basic kind of a rough estimate. Then a master sculptor would go in there and add the details. Painters added wax and colors to hair, lips, and clothes to give it some color. Metal workers added bronze pieces like swords and shields. Here we see a picture that shows how Greek statues were incredibly lifelike, showing natural poses and accurate muscles. And then this is Phidias, right? Phidias was a famous Greek sculptor who designed the frieze and Athena statue in the Parthenon. So here we can see, here's the Athena statue. Here's Phidias. Here is it's not the original, but a reconstruction of the Athena statue in the Parthenon. And then here is some of that frieze that he sculpted. So Greek drama. So drama is the art of theater, which was a huge part of Athenian life. Here's a symbol for theater, with the happy mask being comedy and the sad mask being tragedy. The theater of Dionysus, who is shown here, who is the god of merriment, could accommodate thousands of people. So merriment is like happiness, partying, right? Probably wine, as you see here. And Greek plays developed from songs and dances to honor Dionysus. So originally, the first sorts of plays and musicals were just simply, to honor Dionysus. Over time, playwrights developed stories. So playwrights are people who wrote plays and write plays. Developed stories with a few main characters and a chorus. So a chorus was a group of men who recited lines that commented on the actions of the main characters. The words spoken by the chorus helped explain and expand on the story. So kind of like a group of men that just kind of gave details of the story and kind of told the story as it went along. Men played all the roles, both the roles of men and women, and they wore masks with expressions on their faces that the audience could easily see. So you can see here what those masks might have looked like. And plays were staged in bowl, open-air theaters with the stage at the bottom. So here you can see it's a semicircle, right, with the stage down here. and it's outside, and the sound would have carried pretty well here. All right, Greek philosophy. So Athenians loved to talk and argue about the natural world, as well as the meaning of life, justice, truth, and beauty. So when I say the natural world, I mean things like here we see a rainbow. So Athenians might have, discussed, well, why is this happening? How is this happening? Or thunder and lightning, like trying to explain how those things were occurring, right? They didn't know, they didn't have science how we have today. They didn't know that like things were made up of atoms, but they would have discussed it nonetheless. So again, the natural world as well as the meaning of life, justice, truth, and beauty. So this is called philosophy. Philosophy, which means the love of wisdom. And then Socrates was a famous Athenian philosopher that encouraged his followers to question everything they knew. That was kind of his thing. So when you think Socrates, think he taught his students through questions. So more here about Socrates. Socrates' constant questioning brought him trouble, and he was eventually accused of dishonoring the gods and misleading his followers. So Socrates was brought to trial, as you can see here, and sentenced to death by poison. Specifically, uh, he was made to drink hemlock, which was the juice of a poisonous plant. So here's an image of him drinking hemlock calmly because he just accepted his fate, with his followers kind of distressed all around him. And Socrates was really important because he inspired future philosophers such as Plato, who was someone he taught directly, and then um, his student Plato eventually taught Aristotle, who was another very very important Greek philosopher. All right, so last thing here is on Greek sports. So Greeks held athletic games to honor the gods and goddesses. So um, the Panathenea was a festival with athletic games dedicated to the goddess Athena. So that makes sense, right? Athena was the goddess of Athens, so their big festival and sporting event was the Panathenea, which honored her. And these games included foot, horse, and chariot races, including one where men would jump from chariot to chariot, sounds pretty cool. Um, the image here on the left shows the result of a chariot race, with the champion being crowned with, um, you know, crowned as the winner. The games also included boxing and wrestling, so combat sports. Um, and in the pancratium, men could punch, kick, and choke each other until someone surrendered, lost consciousness, or died. So, very, very extreme game of combat. Uh, Another form of uh, sporting event was the Olympics, which were held every 4 years in Olympia to honor the god Zeus. And so that's not in Athens, but it was an important, event. And the Greeks called it. It was so important. The Greeks called it a truce in wars, so everyone could participate, could compete, right? And that's something that the spirit of that continues on to the Olympics today. All right. So in this lesson, we learned about the major cultural achievements of Athens. All right. Thank you.